There's a place where the evening comes slowly, not in a rush, not all at once, but the way warmth leaves a stone that has been sitting in sunlight all day, gradually, gently, with a kind of quiet generosity. The sky there moves through shades of amber and rose and the softest gray, and if you watch it long enough, you begin to feel your own breath slow to match it. This is the village of Endover. It sits in a wide green valley between two hills so old they have forgotten they were once mountains. A river runs along the eastern edge of the village, and it is the kind of river that sounds like thinking, not urgent thinking, not the kind that keeps you awake, but the slow, unhurried kind where thoughts drift past like leaves, and you let them go without chasing them. The houses in Endover are low and warm. Their walls are built from pale stone that glows faintly orange in the evenings, and most of them have gardens that spill over their fences in a gentle, unruly way, lavender brushing the path, climbing roses too comfortable to do anything but bloom. The chimneys send up thin threads of smoke that lean slightly east, always east, because there is almost always a soft breeze coming down from the western hill. At the center of the village, there is a square. In the square, there is a fountain, though it is not a grand one. It is small and round, and the water falls from the center in a quiet curtain, catching the last of the daylight before the lamps come on. People sit near it sometimes, not to talk, just to be near the sound of it. The sound does something to the chest, loosens it somehow, opens it just slightly. In one of the houses along the eastern lane, closest to the river, there lived a woman named Marin. She was not young, and she was not old. She was the sort of age where you have made most of your largest mistakes and learned from enough of them that life has begun to feel not easy exactly, but more like a conversation than a contest. Her hair had begun to silver at the temples, and she wore it loose in the evenings. She had warm hands and a habit of pausing before she spoke, the way people do when they have learned that words are worth considering before you let them go. Marin lived alone, though alone is perhaps the wrong word, because she lived with a great deal of quiet company. She had a small brown dog named Fig, who slept most of the time and woke mostly for meals and short walks and occasional moments when he felt that someone needed the particular comfort of a warm, heavy head in their lap. She had a shelf of books that she had read so many times they fell open to her favorite places on their own. She had a window that faced the river, and she had the light. The light in Endover was the thing travelers remembered, not because it was bright, it was never harsh, but because it had a quality that was difficult to describe to anyone who had not seen it. It came in warm and low, and it touched everything it reached with a kind of attention, as though the sun in Endover was not in a hurry, as though it lingered. On this particular evening, Marin was sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of chamomile tea cooling between her palms. She had had a long week, not a dramatic one. Nothing had broken. Nothing had gone wrong in any significant way, but the kind of long week that comes from many small things stacking themselves on top of each other until you notice on a Thursday evening that your shoulders have been somewhere near your ears for the better part of 3 days. She had set those shoulders down now, deliberately, the way you set down a bag you have been carrying so long you forgot it was there. Fig was asleep at her feet, his small chest rising and falling in the patient rhythm of a creature entirely at peace. Outside, the river moved. Inside, the tea steamed. Marin closed her eyes for a moment and listened to the sound of the water, which was also the sound of the evening, which was also the sound of everything being entirely, completely fine. In a little while, she would do something she had not done in a long time. She would take a walk she had almost forgotten about, along a path that ran beside the river and curved up toward the northern end of the valley. A path she had not taken since the autumn before last, when the light had been different and her heart had been heavier than it was now. But she did not know that yet. For now, she only sat with her tea and her dog and the river sound, and let the evening do its slow and patient work. The chamomile cooled by degrees. Marin watched the steam thin and disappear, and she thought about nothing in particular, which is one of the great luxuries of a life that has been organized carefully enough to allow for it. She thought, briefly, about the bread she had forgotten to buy. She thought about a letter she owed a friend and had been composing in her mind for weeks, never quite finding the right beginning. She let both thoughts drift past like the leaves on the river. They would still be there tomorrow. Tonight, she did not need to hold them. Fig shifted at her feet and made a small sound, not waking, just resettling. The way sleeping creatures do, as though even in sleep they are occasionally making adjustments toward greater comfort. When the last of the daylight had faded from gold to a pale and tender blue, Marin set down her cup and rose from her chair. She moved through her house in the way she always did in the evenings, unhurried, familiar, touching things lightly as she passed them. The back of the wooden chair, the edge of the bookshelf, the cool stone of the windowsill in the hallway. These small contacts were a kind of ritual, though she had never called them that. They were simply the way she moved through her own life, touching it, noticing it, confirming it. She took her coat from the hook by the door. It was an old coat, dark green, with large pockets and a collar that could be turned up against a breeze. She had owned it for so long that it had become a second shape for her. It fell over her shoulders with the ease of something that knows exactly where it belongs. Fig opened one eye. Only a short one, she told him. He closed the eye. He had heard this before. Short ones and long ones both ended with her coming home, so the distinction mattered less to him than she imagined. Outside, the air was cool and carried the faint mineral smell of the river. The path began just beyond her garden gate, a narrow line of packed earth that ran alongside the water. The grass on either side of it was long and soft, and the lavender that had escaped the garden of the house 3 doors down had colonized a good stretch of the verge, so that walking in the evening you walked through waves of it, that calm, clean scent that asks nothing of you except that you breathe. Marin breathed. She walked slowly, not because she was tired, but because the evening deserved to be moved through at a pace that allowed you to actually be in it. The river ran beside her, dark now and smooth, catching the last blue silver of the sky. A few ducks sat on the far bank, already settled for the night, their heads tucked back in that way that always looked impossibly comfortable. She had always envied ducks their certainty about when it was time to stop. The path curved gently northward, and as it curved, the village sounds grew quieter. The distant sound of someone's radio, the occasional lamp coming on in a window, the low voices of a couple returning home with a basket of things from the market, all of it softened, fell away, until she was walking in something close to true quiet, with only the river for company. She had forgotten how good this was. Not the walk, exactly, though the walk was good, but the specific sensation of being outside in the evening in a place where she felt safe, where the darkness was soft rather than alarming, where the shapes of trees against the sky were familiar and friendly. She had spent a long time, the autumn before last, finding the evening difficult. Something had been wrong inside her then, nothing she could name cleanly, only a persistent gray quality to things, a heaviness that made even familiar comforts feel distant, slightly unreachable. She had stopped taking this walk because she had stopped being able to trust the comfort of it. But that had passed. It had passed the way those things do when you are patient enough with yourself, when you allow the season to change without demanding that it change faster. She was on the other side of it now, and standing on the other side, you could appreciate the crossing in ways you never could while you were making it. She paused at a place where a large ash tree leaned over the river, its roots gripping the bank with the quiet authority of something that has grown exactly where it chose to grow. The branches overhead were still holding some of their leaves, pale yellow now, catching the faint light in a way that made them look like they were lit from inside. She stood beneath the tree and looked up through the leaves at the early stars beginning to appear. And it was then that she noticed the light. Not the starlight, not the soft amber glow of the village behind her. Something else. A warm, low, particular brightness coming from somewhere up ahead, somewhere along the path that she had thought ended at the old stone bridge. She had walked this path 100 times. She knew where it ended. And yet, she looked at the light for a long moment, her hands in her pockets, her breath making small clouds in the cool air. It was not alarming. It was, if anything, the exact opposite of alarming. It was the kind of light that made you think of rooms where people were warm, and something good was being made. She began walking toward it. The path past the old stone bridge had always been there, she was almost certain. Or perhaps it had always been there, and she had simply never followed it. Memory is like that sometimes. It keeps its doors closed until the right moment, and then opens them quietly, without announcement, and you step through and think, of course. I always knew this was here. The light ahead was steady, not flickering like a fire, not harsh like electricity, something warmer and more patient than either. It came from around a gentle bend in the path, filtered through a stand of birch trees whose white trunks glowed softly in the dusk. The birches made a sound when the breeze moved through them, a dry, papery whisper, like someone turning the pages of a book they love. Marin walked through them. On the other side of the birch stand, the valley opened slightly. She had not known this, had not guessed the valley had this extra room in it. And there, settled into the opening as naturally as though it had grown there, was a market. Not a large market, not a loud one, nothing that required noise or hurry or the anxious alertness of commercial places. It was a collection of perhaps 15 or 20 small stalls arranged in a loose half circle around a fire that burned in a stone basin at the center. The fire was the source of the light, warm, generous, sending a gentle orange glow across everything. People moved between the stalls slowly, the way people move when they have nowhere else to be. She stood at the edge of it for a moment, simply looking. There was no one at the entrance to greet her or redirect her. No signs announcing rules or hours. The market had the feeling of a place that had always existed and simply did not require explanation. She noticed that the other people there, perhaps 20 of them, adults mostly, a few older children, were dressed in the comfortable, unhurried way of people out on an evening they had given themselves entirely to. She walked in. The first stall she passed was run by a man with a gray beard and very kind eyes, who was selling small glass bottles filled with things that caught the firelight. Oils and tinctures, she thought at first, but looking closer, she saw that some bottles held what appeared to be dried flowers suspended in amber, and some held something that moved very slowly when you tilted them, like thick honey, but brighter. The man did not press her to buy anything. He simply stood with his hands on the counter and smiled when she glanced up at him, the way people smile when they are genuinely glad you have come. The second stall was all fabric, bolts of it in colors that were not showy, but were deeply, quietly beautiful. The kind of colors found in nature at its most subtle. The gray-green of lichen, the soft ochre of winter grass, the particular blue of evening just before the stars come out. A woman was folding lengths of cloth with a careful, loving attention, and when Marin paused to touch the edge of one piece, a cloth the color of pale river water, the woman said simply, "Good for sleeping, very good for sleeping," and went back to her folding. Marin moved on. There was a stall selling bread, still warm, and the smell of it was the smell of every good kitchen she had ever known. There was a stall with bundles of herbs tied with string, and the smell there was green and clean and good. There was a small table where an elderly woman sat with a bowl of smooth stones in her lap, and did not seem to be selling them at all, only turning them one by one in her fingers with the concentrated pleasure of someone engaging in a perfect private pastime. And in the center of all of it, the fire. Marin drifted toward it. She held her hands out slightly, and the warmth reached her in that way that open fires do, not from any single direction, but from all around, the air itself becoming gentler. A young woman she did not recognize was standing on the other side of the fire, looking into it with an expression of quiet contentment. She glanced up and caught Marin's eye and smiled. "Is this the first time?" she asked. "I think so," Marin said, "though I'm not entirely certain." The young woman nodded, as though this was a perfectly sensible answer. "It's like that sometimes," she said. "Some people come for years and still feel like it's the first time. I think that might be the point." "What is the point?" The young woman thought about this for a moment with evident pleasure. the way people think when they are asked a question they have been quietly turning over for a while. I think, she said finally, that it's a place for remembering what you already know. The fire crackled softly between them. Somewhere behind her, someone was playing a stringed instrument, something low and simple and very, very slow. The notes fell like water and dissolved. Marin turned the words over in her mind, remembering what you already know. She was not sure, yet, what she was meant to remember. But she was also not in any hurry to know. The fire was warm. The music was soft. The air tasted of wood smoke and night air, and the bread from somewhere nearby. And there was no part of her that wanted to be anywhere else. She stayed close to the fire for a while, warming her hands, letting the market move gently around her. After a time, she could not have said how long, because time at the market moved according to its own arrangement. Marin found herself at a stall near the back of the half-circle, one she had not noticed on her first pass through. It was a small stall, lower than the others, with a table draped in cloth the color of deep water. On the table there were cups, dozens of them in every size and shape, arranged in no particular order, some ceramic, some glass, some wood so old and smooth it looked almost like stone. Behind the table sat a man who was somewhere between middle age and much older, the kind of face that resists easy dating, with the sort of calm that takes a long time to earn. He was not doing anything. He was simply sitting, with great completeness, in the way some people can sit that makes sitting seem like its own sufficient activity. When she approached, he reached under the table and produced a cup without her asking. It was ceramic, the color of cream, with a small chip on the rim that had been repaired with what appeared to be a line of gold. "I didn't ask for anything," she said. "No," he said agreeably. He set the cup on the table, and a small clay pot appeared beside it, steaming. "But I've been making this all evening, and it does better when shared." She sat down on a small stool across from him. There was a stool there, as if expected, and let him pour. The liquid was pale gold and smelled of something she could not name precisely. Chamomile was in there, and something slightly floral, and something else underneath that was almost familiar, like a melody you know, but cannot quite place. She wrapped her hands around the cup. It was exactly the right temperature. "What is this market?" she asked. "Just a market," he said, and then, reconsidering, "a particular kind of market. The kind where people trade things that can't be easily weighed." She looked at him. What do people trade here? He thought about this in the same unhurried way the young woman by the fire had thought about her question, with genuine consideration, as though the question deserved the full honor of being taken seriously. "Tonight," he said, "I think most people are trading something they don't need any more for a night of good rest." Marin looked down at her cup. "What does that mean, practically?" "It means different things to different people. Sometimes it means giving up a worry that was never going to resolve itself tonight anyway. Sometimes it means setting down a comparison, the kind where you look at your own life and find it lacking for no real reason except habit. Sometimes it's simpler than that. Sometimes someone comes here and realizes they've been carrying something embarrassing from 15 years ago like it happened yesterday, and they just put it down because they're in a place where that's permitted. He poured a cup for himself and settled back in his chair. The market doesn't do anything dramatic, he continued. It's not that kind of place. It just makes it a little easier to do the thing you were going to do anyway, given enough time and enough kindness toward yourself. Marin sipped her tea. It was remarkable. Not in a way she could describe exactly, but in the way that very good, very honest things are remarkable. Not because they contain something strange, but because they contain exactly what they promise and nothing else. She thought about what she might trade, what she might set down. There was a habit of concern that lived in her chest, a low-level monitoring, a perpetual scanning of the near distance for things that might need worrying about. It had been useful once. She had needed it once, in a period of her life when things had genuinely required careful watching. But the period had ended, and the habit had stayed, like a guard who kept their post long after the crisis had passed. She thought about it now, felt its familiar shape in her chest, the slight tightening, the readiness. What would it feel like to set it down just for tonight? She exhaled slowly and tried it. And there was something, a slight loosening. Nothing dramatic. The man across from her had said it would not be dramatic, but a loosening, genuine and unmistakable, like a knot that has been worked at patiently, finally giving slightly under your fingers. The music from somewhere behind her had shifted, or perhaps deepened. The notes were slower now, and lower, and she could feel them in her sternum rather than only hearing them. The man across from her was quiet. He had the gift of silence, the kind that didn't press you to fill it, but held you comfortably inside it instead. She finished her tea. He refilled it without asking. She let him, and looked out at the fire and the market and the people moving through the quiet between the stalls, all of them engaged in their own version of the same slow transaction, giving something they didn't need anymore, for something they had always had but kept forgetting. She did not rush away from the cup stall. There was nothing at the cup stall that required her to rush. She sat until the second cup of tea was finished, and then sat a little longer, listening to the music and watching the fire and feeling the progressive loosening that had begun with that first careful exhale. The man with the calm face had not pushed any further conversation on her, which she had appreciated. He had spoken again once, about something small, the particular quality of the night air, how it came down from the hills in the autumn, carrying a trace of something green and cold that you could not find in summer air. And then he had gone back to his quiet, and she had gone back to hers, and it had been entirely companionable. When she finally stood, he gave her something. He reached under the table again and produced a small object wrapped in cloth and placed it in her hand before she could ask about it. For later, he said. She held it in her palm. It was light. What is it? Something to hold, he said. When the old habit comes back, it will sometimes. Habits are persistent, but something to hold helps while you wait for it to pass. She unwrapped it carefully. A smooth stone, pale gray, slightly oval, with a warmth to it that suggested it had been held by many hands before hers. She closed her fingers around it, and the fit was so natural, the curve of it exactly the curve of her grip, that she almost laughed. She tucked it in the pocket of her green coat and thanked him. He waved the thanks away with the easy gesture of someone who has no use for them, and moved on before she could make it awkward. She wandered back through the market. It was later now, or perhaps deeper into the evening. The light was a little different, the fire burning down to a more concentrated warmth, the people around her having drifted into smaller, softer conversations. A few had left, she noticed, and those who remained seemed to have settled more fully into the place, the way guests settle into an evening when they have decided to stay for the good part. She found herself at the bread stall. The person behind it was a woman with flowers still on her hands, and the satisfied expression of someone who has done good work today. The bread was in rounds, golden brown and dense, and the smell of it was the kind that could convince you the world was simple and good. "What goes into it?" Marin asked. The woman considered the question seriously, the way everyone here seemed to consider questions seriously. "The usual things," she said. "Flour, water, salt, thyme, and whatever was in the air today. Some days that adds something specific. Today there was a good wind from the south, and something about it. I can't explain it better than that. But the loaves feel different, warmer." She wrapped a small round in brown paper and handed it across without charging anything. The market doesn't use money, Marin realized. Not in the usual way, the bread woman confirmed. "You brought yourself here, didn't you? Came when you needed it, even without knowing you needed it. That's usually enough." Marin took the bread. She pressed it against her chest and felt the warmth of it through her coat, through the layers of her, and something in her responded to that warmth with the automatic, uncomplicated gratitude of a body that is cold and has been given something warm without having to ask. She carried the bread and walked the perimeter of the market slowly, trailing her free hand along the backs of the stalls, feeling the textures: rough wood, smooth cloth, cool metal where a lamp hung from a crossbar. The night air was kind tonight. The stars had come out fully overhead, more of them than she usually saw, perhaps because she was farther from the village lights. Out here in this small opening in the valley she had not known existed. She stopped near the fire again and tipped her head back to look at the stars. There is a specific thing that happens when you look at a great many stars. Something releases in the chest. Some scale of importance recalibrates. Not in a nihilistic way, not in a way that makes life feel small and therefore meaningless, but the opposite. The sky is so large and you are looking at it, and the looking is so entirely voluntary, so entirely a choice you made for its own sake, that it confirms something about you. That you are a person who looks at stars, that you have always been this person, even when you forgot. That this, too, is who you are. She looked for a long time. The fire popped quietly. The music had stopped, or perhaps only rested. She did not mind. She was, she realized, more rested than she had been all week. Not because she was tired, she was not especially tired, but because she had been, for the past hour or so, entirely present. Not in the future where concerns live, not in the past where regrets make their home, but here, the fire, the stars, the stone in her pocket, the bread warm against her chest. Here, there was a storyteller at the market. She almost missed her. She was not at a stall, had not announced herself with any kind of display. She was simply sitting on a low stool near the eastern edge of the market, where the firelight reached, but only softly, and a small group of people had gathered and sat on the ground around her, 4 adults, 2 older children with blankets around their shoulders, listening. Marin sat down on the edge of the group, on the cool ground, and drew her knees up and listened too. The storyteller was a woman with very dark eyes, and the kind of voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the throat, slow and resonant, filling the air around it without effort. She was mid-story when Marin arrived, and Marin did not know the beginning, but that was all right. Some stories are like rivers. You can step in anywhere and feel the current. The story was about a man who had spent many years building a wall. Not a wall for keeping people out, the storyteller was careful to say. A wall for keeping things in. He had placed things behind it, old griefs, old guilts, things he had said that he wished he hadn't, things he hadn't said and wished he had. And the wall had grown over the years, as walls will when they are regularly attended to, until it was very high and very solid, and he could no longer see what was on the other side of it. Problem with the wall, the storyteller said, was not that he had built it. Everyone builds walls of one kind or another. The problem was that he had begun to believe the wall was him, that the wall and the person were the same thing, and if the wall came down, there would be nothing left of him. A child under a blanket on the other side of the group asked, "Was he wrong?" The storyteller smiled in the direction of the voice. "Very wrong," she said, because the wall was not him. It was just something he had made. He had forgotten the difference between what we make and what we are. She paused, and in the pause the fire shifted and the shadows moved. How did he remember? An adult voice asked. He came to market, the storyteller said simply, and there was a gentle ripple of something through the group, not quite laughter, but its warmer cousin. In the story, the man came to market, and at the market, no one asked about the wall. No one tried to knock it down or climb over it or advise him on its construction. They simply gave him things: a cup of something warm, a piece of bread, a stone to hold, a while of sitting by a fire. And in the receiving of these ordinary things, he remembered something important, that the part of him which could receive kindness was not behind the wall. It was in front of it. It had always been in front of it. He was in front of it, the real him, the part that could be warm and fed and held by firelight, and the wall was somewhere behind him, and perhaps it would always be there, but it did not define the distance between himself and comfort. The storyteller's voice had grown even slower as she approached the end. The children were still. The adults were still. Marin was still. He walked home from the market, she said, and the wall was still there. It was always still there, but he had remembered that he did not live inside it. He lived in the wide space in front of it, where the light was, where he could hear the river, where his door was open and his lamp was on. And that was enough. That night, he slept well for the first time in a very long time. Silence, the fire, the stars. Marin sat with the end of the story for a long moment, pressing the smooth stone in her pocket with 2 fingers. She thought about her own wall, not the same wall, she knew. But walls are rarely entirely different from one another. She thought about what the storyteller had said, the wide space in front of it, where the light was. She was sitting in that space right now. She had been sitting in it this whole evening, ever since she had set down the bag of accumulated small things and put on her coat and followed the path along the river. The wall was there, probably. It was probably always going to be there, some portion of it. But she was here, on this side of it, in the firelight, with warm bread and a stone in her pocket, and the stars arranged beautifully overhead. And she was, she realized, genuinely and completely all right. Not in a fragile way that might collapse under examination. In a solid, simple, weight-bearing way. All right. She stayed until the storyteller finished a second story, a shorter one, about a tree and a child and a season. And then she rose quietly and moved back into the market to take one last walk through it before she headed home. The market at this late hour was deeply peaceful. The fire had settled into its evening phase, lower, redder, burning, with the concentrated warmth of coals. The stall keepers were not packing up, but they had grown quieter, tending to small tasks with the unhurried attention of people at the end of a good day. Somewhere, a lamp had been turned down. The music had returned, or the musician had returned, and was playing something even slower than before. A single repeating melody that resolved and then began again in the way that certain simple melodies do. Each repetition slightly different, slightly deeper. Marin moved through the warm air without intention, which was its own pleasure, to be in a place without a route, without a plan, following only the mild pull of curiosity. She found herself at the stall of the elderly woman with the bowl of stones. The woman was still turning them, one by one, with the same slow absorption. She looked up when Marin approached. Her eyes were very clear, the kind of clear that sometimes comes with great age, as though a long life had eventually distilled itself into a very specific quality of attention. "Sit," she said. It was not a command exactly, more like an invitation that had been made with great confidence in its acceptance. Marin sat on another of those stools that seemed to appear wherever she needed one. "What are the stones for?" she asked. The woman selected one from the bowl and held it out. "Take it, feel it." Marin took it. It was warm from the woman's hands, pale in color, smooth as polished marble. She held it and felt the slight weight of it, the comfortable, grounded, undramatic weight of a thing that is exactly what it is. "Stones," the woman said, "have been here longer than anything you have ever worried about." She said this without any edge, simply as a fact. They have been here longer than the worry, and they will be here after it. When you hold one, some small part of you knows this. You don't have to think it. You just know it. Marin held the stone and discovered this was true. Not because it resolved anything. Not because it made the worry smaller by comparison, in that diminishing way that sometimes feels like comfort, but is actually only scale. But because holding something ancient and patient in your hand reminded you that patience existed. that it was a real thing that existed in the world, that the world itself was, in its deep and geological bones, patient. Keep that one, the woman said. The one in your pocket is for the habit. This one is for the nights when the habit gets loud. Marin looked at her. How did you know about the one in my pocket? The woman smiled. Because he gives one to everyone, she said, and it was clear who she meant. And I give one to everyone after. He gives you something to do with your hands. I give you something to do with your mind. She tapped her own temple with one finger, gently. Something to put there instead. Something old and calm and larger than the noise. Marin looked at the stone in her palm. It sat there patiently, doing nothing in particular except being exactly itself. She pocketed it alongside the other. For a while, she and the woman sat together in a silence that felt very full, very comfortable. The way silence feels with people who have no need to perform anything for each other. The market murmured softly around them. The fire sent its warmth. The music repeated its patient pattern. Do you come here often? Marin asked. I live here, the woman said. Marin looked at her. In the market. Near it, the woman said, and gestured vaguely in a direction that could have been north, or perhaps slightly west of north. There are a few of us who stay, not many. The market doesn't need much minding. It mostly minds itself. She paused. But it helps, I think, to have people who choose to be here rather than people who only pass through. Somewhere that's only made of passing through people loses something. What does it lose? Continuity, the woman said without hesitation. The sense that someone is paying attention, that the place matters beyond tonight. She turned another stone in her fingers. All good places need someone who loves them all the time, not just when they're useful. Marin thought about her house on the eastern lane, about the way she touched its walls as she moved through it, the bookshelf, the windowsill. She thought about how she had never thought of that as love before, but perhaps it was. Perhaps that was exactly what it was. She left the stone woman with a warmth she carried in her chest that was separate from the fire warmth, but not unlike it. Interior, specific, gently persistent. The night around her was fully dark now, the stars as bright as she had ever seen them, the fire and ember glow at the center of the half circle. She had been here, she still could not say how long. Long enough. That was all she knew. Long enough. She had one more place she wanted to visit before the walk home. The last stall she found was not one she had noticed before, though it was not hidden. It was simply one of those things that becomes visible only when you are ready for it. A thing you walk past several times, and on the third or fourth time, something in you lifts its head and says, "Ah, there." It was the narrowest of the stalls, a single table with a single lamp on it, and a single chair behind the lamp. In the chair sat a woman, perhaps Marin's age, perhaps older, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a book open in her lap. Though she was not reading, she was looking out at the market with the expression of someone watching something they love. On the table, fanned out in a half circle, were small envelopes. Not letters. Marin could see they were too small and too light for letters. They were the size of seed packets. And indeed, when she got close enough, she saw that was exactly what they were. Seeds, she said. Seeds, the woman confirmed, looking at her with warm, attentive eyes. What kind? Different things for different people. The woman stood and came to the table, moving the lamp to one side so she could reach the fan of envelopes. She did not reach for them immediately. She looked at Marin first in the way that certain people look, not assessing, not measuring, but simply attending, as if the person in front of them is something worth taking a real moment with. You came through a difficult season, she said, not recently, a while ago. And you've been on the other side of it for some time now, but you haven't quite, she paused. You haven't quite let yourself know that it's over. There's still a part of you keeping watch, waiting for it to come back. Marin was quiet for a moment. She thought of the habit she had tried to set down. The low-level monitoring, the readiness. Yes, she said. The woman nodded and reached for an envelope near the left side of the fan. She held it out. It was pale yellow, the color of early morning. On the front, in simple handwriting, it read, "For the season after the difficult season. Plant these when you're ready," the woman said, "in a pot on your windowsill or in the garden if you have a corner for them. They don't need much attention. They'll know when it's time. What will they be? Something that blooms in spring and again in late summer," the woman said. "Something that comes back. Something that demonstrates, without making a fuss about it, that things which were dormant have not disappeared. Only waiting." Marin took the envelope. It was light. She could not feel anything inside it, though she supposed she should be able to feel the seeds. But perhaps the envelope was thicker than it looked. It did not matter. She held it with both hands briefly, before tucking it into the pocket of her coat alongside the two stones. And it was a full pocket now, a good pocket, the weight of it comfortable against her leg as she shifted. "Thank you," she said. "It was already yours," the woman said. "I only kept it for you. There are certain things that are said to us in our lives that we carry for decades, not because they are complicated, but because they are exactly right, because they name something true in a way that we had not previously had words for." Marin felt this sentence settle into her in that permanent way. It was already yours. I only kept it for you. She walked away from the last stall with the sense that something had been completed, not in any grand or conclusive way, but in the way that small essential things are completed. A circle quietly closed. A sentence that ends not with an exclamation, but with a period. Clean, definite, sufficient. The market was winding down now. Or perhaps it was only winding inward, distilling into its essential quality. The stall keepers moved with even greater quietness. The fire was lower still, its warmth contained and intimate, reaching only the immediate circle of people still gathered near it. The music had stopped, or perhaps she had simply moved past its reach. Either way, the silence it left was not absence, but fullness, the kind of silence that exists when everything necessary has been said. She made one slow loop of the market's perimeter, taking a last look at all of it. The glass bottles catching the last of the ember light, the folded fabric in its quiet colors, the bread, the herbs, the stones, the cup stall where the calm man sat in his completeness, apparently awake still, but sitting with his eyes closed, which looked less like sleep than like prayer, or perhaps they were the same thing. She paused at the fire. She was not ready to leave, exactly. She was not unready either. She was at the exact point of readiness where it could go either way. And the particular grace of this evening had been that no one had pushed her toward or away from anything. And she trusted now that she could simply let the moment move into the next moment, as moments do. And that when leaving was the right thing, she would know. She waited. And then, simply, she knew. The path home was different at night. Not alarming different. Only quieter and closer. The familiar landmarks appearing in a softer order. The ash tree with its root grip on the riverbank. The lavender on the verge. The old stone bridge with the water moving under it in the dark, with a sound like a long exhale. She walked it as she had walked through the market, slowly, without urgency, letting each thing be what it was. She had both hands in her pockets. Her left hand held the habit stone, warm and oval, and perfectly fitted. Her right hand held the other stone, the old one from the woman with the bowl. Her fingers moved over it very slowly, the way you trace something you are learning to know. The seeds were in her left coat pocket, alongside the first stone. She could feel the edge of the envelope when she turned the stone in her fingers. It was enough to feel it there. She did not need to look at it or think about it. It was keeping itself. River was lovely at this hour. She had forgotten, or perhaps not fully known, how different a river sounds at night. The same sound, the same water, but freed of the daytime sounds that compete with it. It became more itself. It was lower and clearer, and she could hear individual notes in it. The way a stream breaks over a particular stone with a particular sound, that is, that stone's contribution, and no other stones. She stopped once on the bridge and leaned on the railing, looking down at the water. The reflection of the stars moved in the current. Not the stars themselves, only their images, rearranging themselves constantly in the flow, dissolving and reappearing. Never quite stable, never quite gone. She watched this for a while. It was not like watching stars in a sky, which is steady, which invites the long look that still things invite. This was more like watching a thought, present, then gone, then present in slightly different form. Familiar and unfamiliar at once. She thought about the storyteller's man and his wall. She thought about where she was standing, on this side of it, in the wide space in front where the light was. She had been standing here, she understood now, for quite a while, a year, perhaps more, since the difficult season had finally released its hold. But she had been standing here with her head slightly turned, as if expecting to be brought back. As if freedom were a temporary grant rather than a permanent address. She turned to face fully forward, toward the village, toward her house and her dog and her shelf of well-loved books. She did it deliberately, the way you make a choice with your body rather than only your mind, a physical act of commitment. This is where I stand. This is the direction I face. The village was a scatter of warm lights ahead. She walked toward them. The lavender brushed her legs as she came back through the longer stretch of path. She reached down once and ran her fingers through it, bringing them up to her face to smell. It was cool and dry and very clean, the way lavender is at night after a day of sun. and she breathed it in slowly, filling her lungs with it, then letting it go. Her gait was the sound of itself when she opened it, the specific creak she had meant to fix for 3 years and never had, and had now come to love. It announced her return not with any drama, but with a small, familiar conversation. The gate saying, "I know you," the house hearing and saying, "Come in." The lamp she had left on in the window made a warm rectangle of light on the path. She stood on her own path and looked at her own window and felt something so uncomplicated and real that she could only receive it without trying to name it. This is mine. This is where I am. This is enough. She went inside. Fig was on the sofa now. He had moved, in her absence, from the floor to the slightly more comfortable altitude of the cushions, which technically she had told him many times was not for him. She looked at him and found she had no energy whatsoever for the objection. He looked back at her with the serene entitlement of a creature who has made this calculation correctly many times before. She sat down beside him. He shifted, rearranged himself, and placed his head in her lap with the decisive movement of someone executing a well-considered plan. She set one hand on his side and felt him breathe. In slowly, out slowly. She matched it. The lamp in the corner, the river outside, audible even through the walls, its familiar voice, the weight of the dog, the stones in her pockets, the seeds. She did not feel like sleeping exactly. She felt something that was both better and more specific than the desire for sleep. She felt like resting, like a body and a mind that had been given what they needed and were now in the process of receiving it fully, without resistance, without the compulsive reaching for the next thing. She sat with Fig in the lamplight. The house kept its warmth around her. The night kept its softness outside. At some point between sitting and sleeping, there is a country without a name. It is not quite waking and not quite sleep. It is the place where the body has settled and the mind is just beginning to let go of its grip on the day, releasing each thing gently, not forgetting, but setting aside, the way you set things on a shelf before bed, knowing they will be there in the morning, knowing morning is a better time for them. This is the country Marin was moving through as the lamp burned low and Fig breathed steadily in her lap. She thought softly, without urgency, about the market. She thought about the man with the calm face and the golden seamed cup. She thought about the bread and the warmth of it. She thought about the young woman by the fire who had said it was a place for remembering what you already know. And she thought about what she knew now, had always known, but had remembered tonight with particular clarity. She knew that she was safe, not because nothing difficult would ever happen again. She knew better than to seek that kind of safety, which is not safety, but only avoidance. But safe in the more solid, more honest sense, that she had within her everything she needed to meet whatever came. That she had proven this already in the difficult season, and the proof did not expire. It remained. She was capable of the things that life would ask of her. She had demonstrated this. It was recorded. She knew that she was home, not only in the physical sense of the house on the eastern lane, the gate that creaked, the dog in her lap, but in the sense that she had, over years and difficulties, and the slow accumulation of choices toward herself rather than away built something that deserved the word. A life that felt like a place she lived, not a place she was passing through. A life with weight and texture, and the specific comfort of familiarity. The books that opened to their own favorite pages, the coat that fit like a second shape, the river that she knew by heart. She knew that rest was not a reward. She had spent years, most people spend years, treating rest as the thing that came after you had finally done enough, the prize at the end of a sufficient day. But rest was not a prize. It was the condition under which everything else was possible. It was not earned. It was necessary. And claiming it without guilt, without the requirement of having earned it, was one of the things she had spent the longest time learning. She had learned it. She was practicing it now. Fig breathed. She breathed. The lamp in the corner gave its warm and easy light. She thought of the seeds in her coat pocket. Still in the coat, which hung on the hook by the door where she had placed it when she came in, the pockets full of their good weight. In the morning, she would look at the envelope and perhaps choose a pot for the windowsill. The one in the kitchen, she thought, the one that faced southeast and got the long morning light. She would put the seeds there, and she would tend them with the same quiet attention she gave to the things she loved. And in time, they would do what the seed woman had said they would do. They would come back. They would demonstrate without fuss that things which were dormant had not disappeared. In the morning, tonight, there was only this: the country between waking and sleeping, the lamp going slow, the river speaking quietly to itself outside. She thought of the stars she had seen from the opening in the valley, the extravagance of them, the patient light traveling distances she could not hold in her mind. She thought of them without trying to hold them. Simply let the image be there, and then soften, the way all images soften here, in this borderland, where the mind begins to release its requirement for coherence. There was the fire at the center of the market, burning low and red. There was the old woman and her stones. There was the bread, and its smell of every good kitchen. There was the storyteller's voice, deep and slow and true. There was the man in his wall, on this side of it now, the wide space where the light was. There was the envelope in the coat pocket, pale yellow, waiting patiently. There was Fig. There was the lamp. There was the river. There was the house. These things moved through her like water moves through a wide and quiet place, without hurry, without destination, simply moving because that is what water does, and it is enough. She was sinking slowly, without resistance, not into sleep exactly, into rest, the real and patient kind, the kind that has always been here, waiting, the way the woman had said the seeds were waiting. It was already hers. It had only been kept for her until she was ready. She was ready. She let the river carry the last of the day away. She let the warmth of the lamp, and the warmth of the dog, and the warmth she had brought back from the market in her coat pockets, and in her chest settle her down, down, down into the easiest part of the night, the part where there is nothing left to do, nothing left to think, nothing required of her except the simple, ancient act of receiving rest. Everything was quiet. The stones were warm in her coat. The seeds were waiting in their pale yellow envelope for spring. And Marin, On the eastern lane, beside the river, in the village of Endover, let herself be held by the deep and gentle dark of a night that had been, in every way, exactly what she needed. The river moved, the lamp grew low, and she rested,